Competition strategy in B2B is just like every other aspect of strategy. There's no of course setting. For example, anybody that tells you that you have to have a competition strategy is spending too much of their time looking over their shoulder and not enough time looking forward. What's forward in a B2B context? Looking and thinking about and earning the right to serve the buyer. Except for that funny little period where you really do want to have a competition strategy. I'll show you how to set the right competition strategy for your business.
Funnel Vision is brought to you by Math Marketing, creators of the Funnel Plan. Math Marketing is the source of the 1, 2, 3 of B2B.
As we have over the last few weeks, we're going to focus on market maturity, but of course looking at competition strategy. Buyers are different at each stage of the market maturity. There's a different kind of buyer who's ready to buy at each stage of the market's maturity. And oddly enough, that's what we should focus on to set our competition strategy. So in today's blog, I'm going to remind you exactly who the buyer is at each of the stages in the market maturity, what they need, and therefore what our competition strategy should be. In the very early stages of a market, when an innovation is brand new to the market, the only buyers willing to buy just yet are those that have a reasonably high risk appetite, but they're looking for a return. They're looking to gain some advantage. There's no sense in their mind of who the competition is. The competition is the incumbent. And frankly, they don't even think of competition like that. Their focus is on what's this new thing and what's it going to do for me. So should your focus be on that. The next group of buyers are a little more pragmatic, and they draw comfort from the fact that each other is buying, which is why we have to focus on a narrow niche. They're not yet getting any comfort from the fact that there might be other solutions. So if there are, just ignore them. How about the next group of buyers? Well, at some stage after we've mopped up the early market and then we've moved into the bowling alley, which is where we find a niche and then another couple of niches and then another few niches, at some point everybody's buying. Normally when you've reached that stage, competition has entered the market. And because of that, the buyer actually does care about who the competition is, because they've already worked out they need to buy it. Now it's a question of whose. And so actually now they do care about the competition. Next group of buyers, once we get into Main Street, they're different again. At some point, this becomes a business as usual purchase. Once it becomes one of those kind of buyers, one of those kind of purchases, normally the buying process is handled by some internal admin function, what Geoffrey Moore, the author of this model, calls the infrastructure buyer. Maybe it's IT, maybe it's HR, maybe it's admin, maybe it's procurement. Whoever it is, it's no longer the end user department. There's some specialist buying group who has responsibility for this now. What do they need? They need your product or service to comply with their expectations. We'll come back to that when we talk about competition in the conclusions. Finally, we reach end of life. It's the end of the model out here. Now, when we reach end of life, you've still got the infrastructure buyer who's the procurer of your product or service. But now, if we've ridden that wave well and we're in a strong position, we probably want to slow the decline of this market down. And we maybe even have the capacity to do that. How? We're looking for new uses and new users. Now, what are those new users and users looking for? Innovation, advantage. So once again, we're dealing with the end user, maybe even the boss of the company, but we're certainly not dealing with the infrastructure buyer for the new bits, only for the old bits. What do they need? The opportunity to get ahead. So given that, at each stage of as a market matures, we've got a different kind of buyer. Therefore, what should our competition strategy be?
Shortly, we'll show you how to do this in Funnel Plan. But before that, we're going to do two things: share with you our conclusions and invite you to receive other blogs like this. Let's get to the conclusion first.
So what should our competition strategy be, therefore? In the early market, forget them. There probably genuinely isn't any competition. In the bowling alley, when you're focusing on a narrow niche, they're not focused on the competition, they're focused on whether they should buy at all. Remember, they're not quite yet ready to buy. So they're not focused on the competition, neither should you be. There may be competition, just ignore it. It's irrelevant. Then we get into tornado and suddenly it is relevant. Certainly the demand side of our business has got a lot easier. Buyers know they need to buy. What's got harder is convincing them to buy ours rather than the other guys. So now, suddenly, from having ignored the competition, we now need to not only focus on them, but frankly, attack them. Product comparisons, definitely. Why is yours better? Where is yours better? Go hard. If you've got some scale advantage, that is, you rode the early stage of the market well, and you actually built up a bit of infrastructure, and yours is a business where there are scale economies. That's not true in every business, but if there are scale economies and you have the scale and your competition doesn't, seriously consider using price as a competitive weapon against the competition right now. You might even drive price down, even artificially, because it's going to hurt your competition more than it's going to hurt you. So we've ignored the competition, now suddenly we're attacking them. Now let's go to Main Street. Remember, we've moved buyers now. It's no longer the end user department buying, it's now IT, finance, procurement, admin, HR. It's the infrastructure buyer. And that infrastructure buyer cares about very different things. They need you to comply with their expectations. You need to know your competition, where they're weak, so that you can advantage your strengths. Finally, we get into end of life. Now, here we got a bit of a fork in the road. If we're the weak guy in the market, seriously think about making friends with your competition so they can buy you. Because being in a weak position in a market, it's a horribly unprofitable situation to be in, except in a very small number of circumstances. So you're probably going to get bought out. Consider your strategy for that. So what's your competition strategy? Get them to buy you. If you're the strong guy, remember we've attacked them in the tornado phase. In Main Street we focused again kind of on procurement. At end of life we've still got that procurement type buyer, the infrastructure buyer as Geoffrey Moore calls it, but we've got new uses and new users. And so now the competition strategy for those new users and new users is ignore them, again, because it's new. This innovative buyer who's at the end of a cycle looking to apply your product or service to a new use case, they don't care about the competition if there is any competition at all. And that's what your competitive strategy should be for each stage in the market maturity.
If you enjoyed this blog, then likely you will enjoy others. If you haven't already, you can subscribe to receive this blog by visiting mathmarketing.com/blog or by visiting our YouTube channel. If you have a colleague who may be interested, we would be so grateful if you invited them to subscribe. Why don't you do that now? And when you come back, we'll show you how we do that in Funnel Plan.
As you know, the funnel plan captures the strategy, the velocity, and then the tactics that are going to deliver that velocity in a single page go-to-market plan. Today we're focusing on the competition strategy in the funnel plan. Now, before I go into the funnel plan software, let me again make the point about competition strategy. If you've determined that your market maturity is early in the market and therefore you shouldn't be focusing on the competition, then what you're probably going to do is to switch off the competition analysis section of funnel plan, instead focusing on every other element of the plan. But if you have to focus on competition, let's take a look at how we do that in the funnel plan software. So let's take a look at our blogging video. You'll see here that competition is showing. Let's go through and take a look at the competition. It's in the strategy section. So strategy, down through to competition. That menu item wouldn't be there if competition was disabled. And what we do with the competition analysis is we stack ourselves up against 5 other competitors. Now you might have 55 or only 3. The funnel plan allows for analysis against up to 5 competitors. The key with competitors though is to think about not who else makes stuff like mine, but who else can solve the problem that I solve, because that's who your true competition is. Having worked out who else can solve the problem, then compare yourself against them on 5 factors. Now the 5 standard factors that we use in funnel plan are share, how compelling their proposition is, the unique selling proposition, and the U is there for a reason. Not how good's your proposition, but how good and unique is your proposition. If you've got a great proposition but so does everybody else, then it's not unique. Recognition, cost and references. I'll go through each of those. Share has a strength all on its own. The gorilla enjoys advantages that the chimps in a market don't. Assess yourself simply on the factor of share. If we are 10, and these are arbitrary units, you can use any level that you like. What I typically do is start with us as 10 and then work out where the competition is relative to us. So it looks like plastics has a little less competition, GRM a little more, Enviroplast are the same, and this cleverly named company at the end here is 12. So we've got 2 who are stronger, 1 who's the same as us, and 2 who are weaker. Now you'll notice that the stronger competitors have been highlighted a little, and the weakest competitor highlighted a little again. Now that's all impacted by this sensitivity here. And if you adjust the sensitivity up or down, what will happen is that it'll allow for a greater or lesser tolerance. Now if I allow for 45% tolerance, then you'll see that nobody really stands out. But if I bring that tolerance right down, then I've got seriously weak competition. Let's bring it back to 25% again. Okay, so let's take a look at unique selling proposition. Once again, the question isn't how well do you solve the problem, but how well and uniquely do you solve the problem. And so the product or service itself, your price, your after-sales service, if that's a function of your offering, all of the elements that your customer would consider that which I get from you when I pay you money. How unique and strong is that? Now in this case, Hardbits has compared themselves and found themselves to be strongest on USP. Remember, you don't need to be strong for the whole market, just the market as you have described it. So if you've got a very narrow strategy, which you do in the bowling alley, then 2 points. Firstly, you only need to compare yourself to competitors for that narrow niche. Secondly, I just argued we don't need to focus on competition at all anyway. So frankly, if we're in the bowling alley, strip it all out. So we're really only going to use competition strategy in Tornado, Main Street and End of Life. If we're in those stages, then it's broad competition. Who else can solve the problem like I can? Now, recognition. You might have great share, but nobody knows it. How well are you known in the market? I know they're related, but they're a little different. Assess yourself against your competition. Do the same then for cost. Now cost, be careful here, it's not price. Cost is your base cost. And the reason we're focusing on cost and not price is because if you've got the lowest cost, then you can choose to either offer the lowest price or not offer the lowest price and take the most profit. Either of those is an advantage. Either being able to offer the lowest price and stay in business, or being able to bank and meet the market's price. That's a strength. Price is just a decision on the day. Cost is a current reality. So we're looking here at your base cost. Does it cost you less or more to make the product than your competition? Now, references. You might have great recognition, but it could be
that you don't have the ability to prove that you can deliver. References are all about proof. Clearly they're critical in the bowling alley, but competition isn't, so your references need to be broad enough to be used in the tornado, main street and end of life phases. Assess yourself against the competition on each of those 5 factors and then set a strategy to take advantage of areas where you're strong and mitigate weaknesses. You might choose to leverage a particular weakness of a single competition, or you might choose even to find a way to mitigate your weakness against that same competitor. You can go broad and think about your strategy for leveraging your strengths and weaknesses overall, or you can go competitor by competitor. The real key here is, what are you going to do about that analysis to improve your position, mitigate your weaknesses and leverage your strengths? And that's your competition strategy for the tornado, main street and end of life phases.
In next week's show, we're going to move from the buyer talking from a strategy perspective. We're actually going to talk about how buyers buy, what we call the buyer's journey, a coin I termed in 2003 when I wrote The Leaky Funnel. But for now, may your funnel be full and always flowing.